thank you all so much for coming. We're happy that you can make it out to talk about this very important issue, the future of video, competition, open internet rules, and all of the above. I'd like to just start off by saying thank you so much to our panelists for coming. And I'll introduce you in just a second before turning it over to my partner in crime, Brian Tremont, who's going to co-moderate with me. This is a very important issue to our industry. A lot's happening in the regulatory space with regard to the future of video. So we thought it was a great topic for discussion to start off this roundtable. And if anybody watches video, which we all do here, we know we're all experts. And we have plenty of thoughts on what we'd like to see, how we'd like our video to be delivered to us. But what we don't think about is the behind the scenes, the business arrangements, the technologies, everything that goes into what it is we get on our video screens, however big those video screens are. If I could just start off by introducing our panelists. We have John from Public Knowledge, the farthest from me. We have Matt Brill with Latham and Watkins. George is with us from Washington Analytics Corporation. And we have Lynn from National Association of Broadcasters, NAB. And then David Young from Verizon. Thank you so much for joining us. And actually, it's not analytics, I'm sorry, it's analysis, right, George?
That's close enough.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Brian, and he's going to start us off with maybe a couple remarks and then kick us off with a question. Great.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. So I'm going to start with some very hard-hitting questions, which is, what video platforms do you subscribe to, and what are your favorite shows? Because I think a lot of where you stand may depend on where you sit, and where you sit to watch your television and what you watch may influence this debate in ways that we don't fully appreciate. So I'd like to start with that. John, you want to go first? And we should mention Matt is obviously at Latham and an FCC veteran, but is represents many of the cable providers, and so his perspective will be shaped by that representation this afternoon. So, John, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I watch a lot of Netflix, I watch a lot of YouTube, I watch some over-the-air TV as well. I'd probably subscribe to Fios TV, but I get home, eat dinner, give the baby a bath, put in the bed, and then it's time for my bed. So if I had more time, I probably would subscribe to more.
So no MVPD for you?
Nope, not right now.
Interesting, there you go. Matt, I bet you've got one.
As Brian said, representing a lot of the cable industry, obviously I'm a traditional cable subscriber. Love it. It's the best thing I've ever participated in. No, it's I am a pretty traditional viewer. I enjoy the premium cable services. Some of the discussion later we'll talk about, where is content today. But for me, when you look at the shows on HBO and Showtime and AMC, they're just dynamite. I haven't, nothing against our friends in broadcast. I haven't been interested in a network show in a long time, apart from live sports, which I still enjoy quite a bit. And
have to restrain Lynn if he comes over at you.
Well, I think it's a sign of the times. There's a lot of terrific content on broadcast networks, but for me, some of the most compelling shows have been things like Game of Thrones and Boardwalk Empire and Homeland and Dexter, and I tend to watch those if I get to watch TV.
John, did we get a show out of you? What shows do we have?
My favorite show ever, probably a cable show, Sopranos. I like Bob's Burgers, that's a broadcast show. My most watched video right now is my kid really likes an Old MacDonald Had a Farm video on YouTube. We watch it once or twice a day, I think.
George, is that one of your favorites?
Well, I was thinking that I should not be on this panel because I'm old school, which I'm comfortable with. And we're a small partnership. I turned the questions over to two out of college employees, and their viewing habits are 180 degrees different than mine. I haven't been to a movie theater in 5 years. I subscribe to RCN because they control the telephone pole, which is valid. And we watch the evening news, which is turned into Entertainment Tonight, so we watch BBC and the Roosevelts, and my divorce court lawyer urged me to watch Survivor, and because they're trained to go into similar situations, which I do, watch Survivor.
Lynn?
Well, I do watch over-the-air television in my home. I am a Verizon Fios subscriber. It is hooked up to a TiVo box, and I have an Apple TV. All those things have Wi-Fi in them, so there are over-the-top things that I watch. But since we're a membership trade association, I would say that I evenly divide my time between ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox programming, and they all have crime procedural formulaic things, and I watch them all.
Well, you won't be surprised to hear that I subscribe to FiOS TV, and I love it. As far as what we watch and watch it on, it's mostly on a smart TV platform or a Chromecast. We like reality shows, so Survivor is a family favorite, Project Runway, MasterChef, those sorts of things, Downton Abbey, of course. And we just recently started binge watching a broadcast show that we never watched when it was first airing, and so now we're watching it, and that's Scandal, and we're just getting started on that, and so we're enjoying that.
All right, so we've talked about your personal experiences. Now let's extrapolate a little bit and talk about what the U.S. General public is doing and how it impacts each of your constituencies and how you think about some of the problems here. So let's start with what you think, what are the trend lines that are important from an investment perspective, from a creative content perspective. Maybe we'll start with you, George, give kind of the overview of the industry, and then we can go around from there.
Well, when I picked up media stocks in 1985, I was trained to believe that it was always a game of market share. You have X amount of hours of discretionary entertainment time. You could read, you could walk, you could watch TV, a movie, exercise. But in that environment, I thought, video was going down. But in the new world, I think video is going up. And my partner, Tom Seitz, pointed out from a study that the number of digital hours spent by a person has now exceeded the number of hours, which is 4.5 hours spent daily watching television. Digital media is now, this is non-voice, is now over 5 hours. Now, that could be video. But I think, that's the big delta. I think what's causing this was the advent of tablets and streaming, and I think that trend will only increase.
And what does that look like longer term? So what does it mean 5 years from now? And does it mean the end of anything?
Well, I wonder if, I'm not associated with anybody. We get to call them the way we see them. A lot of people think that most video will be streamed in 10 years. If most video is streamed in 10 years, why do you need 6 megahertz of spectrum, and what happens to the affiliate? And that's what I'd be concerned about.
Lynn, are we concerned about that? In terms of the trend lines and stuff?
I think we see broadcast having longevity, and it's certainly too early to predict the death of any particular distribution methodology. I mean, we do see people gravitating to their digital devices, and they do watch YouTube videos on their phones, and they watch movies on their tablets, and they watch sports on their big TVs. And I think those are trends, as you say, videos going up, that those will continue to accelerate, especially as device costs go down and capabilities go up. The best deal in the world are those devices that you now watch either conventional television or what people call digital media on. It's a terrible business to make those devices because the profit margins are so slim, but for the consumer, it's the deal of the century. And those kinds of entertainment or information programs that people are getting now, they're going to be the same people 10 years from now that they are now, just a little bit older, and there'll be people behind them that have those same hungers to satisfy. So we see it's all good for everybody.
I'd like to stick with you for one more follow-up question, if I can. You talked a little bit about the platforms. What about the creative process itself? We've seen lots of new platforms start to create content where broadcast formerly was the exclusive creative content, particularly with Netflix and others. Where does creative content going in terms of where the money will be spent to develop the next programming 5 years from now?
I think there's maybe a shift in terms of the past few years. We've talked about the best screen available, and the consumers will take the programming they want and they'll see it on the best screen they have, whether it's this big or whether it's 80 inches. And I think that's changing, that there is more optimization from the creative side for the particular device. I can watch YouTube videos on my smart TV at home, but I really don't want to because they don't look good. And by the same token, if you try to watch a hockey game on your iPhone, good luck, you will never see the puck. So in the same program categories that are popular, there has to be some accommodation of the device that you're looking at it on, and it tends to be by screen size. So creatively, that means adapting to the environment from the production community, and especially when you get to big screens. I think we're pretty bullish on the idea that Ultra HD, 4K TV, and maybe beyond that to 8K someday, but let's stick with 4K, is a new production language and a new kind of programming that people buying these ever cheaper, ever bigger TV sets are going to gravitate to. They can buy them now. They just can't get programming that really shows them off with any kind of variety. So Ultra HD, it replaces everything in your studio and production chain, and being able to accommodate small screens and large screens for the same basic content also has a huge impact on the creative community.
So I'd like to bring David in next. So at the moment, Verizon does not produce content, to the best of my knowledge. So what do you see in terms of where you're getting your content from, what the trend lines are in terms of what your consumers are demanding, first? And then second, Verizon supplies lots of different kinds of devices and screen sizes and facilitates the viewing on a lot of them. Talk a little bit about how you see the distribution across the platforms and what that means over a longer term.
Sure. So, I mean, I think this gets back to the sort of mega trend that was discussed before, and that's that people want to watch TV on the device they want, when they want it, where they want it. And so, you know, our platform has been designed to enable all of those different options. So whether it's traditional multi-channel video, you know, sort of scheduled programming, whether it's on-demand programming, DVR, we actually see DVR programming as one of the most popular platforms for the consumers, so they can watch the pre-scheduled programming when and how they want it. And then, you know, whether they're in the home or mobile is another important distinction. And so, you know, the viewing experience at home, we find that is increasingly multi-screen, where they're watching on, let's say, a big screen, but then interacting with a smartphone or tablet in some way, either with other people who are watching similar programming or with the program itself, as those social media capabilities are increasingly built into the programming. But that gets to that leads you to the rights issue, of course, and so the rights, you know, for sort of the traditional multi-channel video versus on demand versus, you know, streamed in the home versus streamed out of the home are all, you know, different, and so that creates challenges for what's available where.
John, you want to bring in on that, on the issue about where content's coming from and then what devices people are using, and what you, from a public interest perspective, what are you most concerned about in terms of the trend lines on those two?
Well, I mean, where the content is coming from, I think you're going to continue to have a split where you're going to have the very high budget, higher budget than ever before kinds of programming along the lines of Game of Thrones, while at the same time, looking elsewhere on the cable dial, you'll have like Cartoon Network's Adult Swim, which is like really low budget, really niche programming, which I enjoy. I think that's very interesting. And I think you're going to continue to have that, where the cost of production of programming goes down and the barrier to entry to becoming a creator continues to go down. I think the internet really enables that, where you have, you know, people, you know, you have like College Humor, you know, a website which creates a lot of just original stuff. You've got Funny or Die, and you know, things like that I think are going to be a huge part of video in the future, while at the same time you do continue to have the super high budget, you know, network and cable programming. And I would just expect that to continue to have that fairly substantial divide. And yeah, people, where people watch, they depend on so much. I mean, I watch TV very often in the living room on a regular traditional TV with a streaming box because I want to watch TV with my wife, and it's easier to do it on a TV than gathering around a laptop or a tablet. So I think that part of that just depends on people's age. People who are single living on their own are probably much more likely to watch TV on a mobile device because if they're watching it at home primarily by themselves, it makes more sense.
So I'd like to turn to, and if it makes you feel any better, we do the same thing in our house. In fact, we'll have Kindles on, and this is embarrassing, but it keeps all of us in business, consumers like me. Kindles on, the television on, iPads on all of our laps. It's ridiculous. All these different modes of how we get our video. Speaking of which, I agree with you, Lynn, that a hockey puck is sometimes better seen on a larger screen TV. However, we also recognize that most of the mobile traffic, I think it's like 53% of it from 2012 to 2013 is now video, mobile broadband traffic. So I guess my question, and it's self-interested because we build the infrastructure that supports that traffic, is there enough capacity? How do we get that capacity? What do we need to do, and what do we need to be thinking about? Not just now, like the incentive auctions and things like that, but in the future, what should we be thinking about, and what are some of the roadblocks?
No one can refute all the studies that show that capacity of mobile networks, there's a scarcity there, and over time it must be met, and certainly technology is a part of that with picofemto nanocell directional antennas, whatever technology can do, but spectrum is a component, and that's being pursued as well. There was an editorial, was it yesterday, I think, in the San Jose Mercury News from Marty Cooper, the credited inventor of the cell phone, and Commissioner Rosenworcel that put out a challenge for Silicon Valley to come up with 50 times increase in spectrum efficiency for mobile systems, and there'll be a prize of maybe you'll get 10 megahertz. It was a very tongue-in-cheek, but kind of editorial, but I think it did point up the need for the mobile broadband community to meet its capacity needs. It's not a fad. It's a genuine need, and we all have to figure out ways to make that work, and hopefully we can all take advantage of that. The broadcast community is just as interested in getting to mobile devices as Funny or Die or College Humor. So it's the challenge of our times to do that in a way that we don't kill each other, and that hopefully we all thrive and the consumer wins as well.
Just as a technical matter, I mean, a lot of the problems that we see sometimes when there's like these really high-profile failures of streaming happened with HBO when they would release new episodes of their popular series on their app. It happened with Apple's live stream. I remember it happened with Obama's inauguration. And very often the failures aren't a lack of last-mile capacity. It's just the technical challenges of streaming live, particularly live video to millions of people simultaneously, are just really hard. So, to the extent that there's investments necessary, I think it would just be a mistake to focus solely on thinking it's like, an issue of capacity on the last mile. There's just a lot to be done to make that happen. And that's why I continue, public knowledge, sometimes people think that we sort of support just like the utter domination of online video over every other form, which isn't really true, because I see that, broadcast and cable, they have a one-to-many distribution model, which is really time-tested and very efficient for delivering particular kinds of video programming. So, I think sort of looking to the internet to solve everything in the short term is probably a mistake. So,
Verizon's done some interesting things on one-to-many. You want to talk a little bit about that, David, on the licensed side, and then I want to bring Matt in to talk a little bit about what cable is doing on the unlicensed side, and then George is going to talk to us more broadly about where he sees the industry and the debates on spectrum going forward. So, David?
Yeah, sure. So, going back to sort of the growth of video on mobile, we've seen a tremendous increase over the last 4 years. additional capacity is certainly important, for allowing for increased unicast streaming. But we think that there's also an opportunity for multicast, and the LTE technology that we're using does support a multicast broadcast capability, so that would allow for streaming of real-time live programming that's viewable by multiple devices without having to have a separate stream for each one. So it's sort of the best of the broadcast model as well as the over-the-top internet model. And we're just now, we demonstrated this at the Super Bowl this year, and we're working on improving the technology and figuring out exactly how to make it available and use it for consumers.
Matt, you want to talk a little bit about unlicensed, and then we'll just shift to George?
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly we're experiencing a huge surge in the growth of mobile video traffic, and undoubtedly mobile broadband providers are building out their 4G networks, and the Commission has appropriately focused on spectrum auctions to get more licensed spectrum in the pipeline. But I think there's a broad consensus at this point that it's not an either-or proposition when it comes to licensed and unlicensed spectrum. The Commission has appropriately focused on putting a lot more unlicensed spectrum into the marketplace, and cable operators have been at the forefront of building out massive Wi-Fi networks to enable consumers to take that video into the public, into the street, into the public square, and wherever we go when we travel. The cable Wi-Fi consortium that includes reciprocity for certain key members is now in the hundreds of thousands of hotspots, with very ambitious growth plans to continue deploying hundreds of thousands of additional hotspots. And we get to a point where we're going to have a mesh network that really is ubiquitous in a lot of areas, so that will have blanket coverage in a lot of areas where people can be authenticated easily and use their home subscription without any additional fee. So that's a real benefit to the consumer, and I think that the Commission should be praised for the 5 gigahertz proceeding, trying to put a lot more wideband Wi-Fi spectrum into the marketplace, exploring other opportunities, making sure that unlicensed is part of the incentive auction framework. There's going to be a lot of debates about the extent to which it should be, but I think the Commission appropriately is focused on looking to Wi-Fi as a major piece of the puzzle in terms of solving these bandwidth problems.
I'm an optimist. I think the AWS auction will go well. I think the TV incentive auction, which undoubtedly is the most complicated undertaking I've ever seen in my decades of analysis, I think that'll be pulled off. I think you'll get 84 megahertz, and some of that, again, is unlicensed. Even if it slips 6-12 months, I thought AT&T and Verizon are on record as saying they can live with a slippage like that. So maybe these auctions are more important to T-Mobile, and Sprint has they're full of spectrum. I'm optimistic on Globalstar getting repurposed their satellite spectrum for Wi-Fi at 2.4. I mentioned, as Matt mentioned, 5.0 Wi-Fi, 3.5 Wi-Fi, Connect Ed Wi-Fi. So I think Wi-Fi picks up a lot of the slack. I think longer term, after the incentive auction, you'll still have hundreds of broadcasters still broadcasting. And somewhere you probably need further legislation to address the spectrum that they have. So I'm optimistic here.
But Lynn, how do you think about what happens? Because you have the incentive auction obviously coming up. Can we talk a little bit about what broadcasters are going to be doing with their broadcast spectrum? Because we spent a little time on licensed and unlicensed in the CMRS and the Wi-Fi context, but a little bit about what you all will be doing and what the next generation of TV broadcast looks like.
Sure. Well, obviously those that participate in the auction may go out of the business, and we're really not concerned about that. We're more concerned about those that are left and still retain their spectrum resources. There is a lot of work going on in the technical community towards the next generation of broadcasting. This is not the computing industry where new versions of things are regularly ramped up. In television, because of the universality of television, because of the ubiquity of if you get one channel, you got to get them all, and you can buy that receiver in one place and take it somewhere else. We're heavily dependent on standards to kind of equilibrate between the transmission providers, which are the broadcasters, and the receiver manufacturers that are pretty much decoupled from the broadcasters. So that makes it difficult to go through an upgrade, especially if it's a non-compatible upgrade. But the Advanced Television Systems Committee, that is the standards development organization that developed the digital broadcast standard we have now, is very actively and aggressively working on a new version of the standard that would allow a more spectrum efficient operation, B, new and better services like Ultra HD TV and better mobile service and interactive elements and the ability to send non-real-time files and so forth. So that's a big area of focus for those that are left with Spectrum, and hopefully it'll be a live and let live with our new neighbors, the wireless and the unlicensed people, that they can adapt their program offerings to be the kinds of things that are going to be competitive with the rest of the industry. So there is a very optimistic attitude. There's a lot of money being thrown into this from developers worldwide, and I think the rest of the world is kind of watching what happens with the U.S., both from the point of view of can the incentive auction framework work for them, and secondly, can broadcasting have a new lease on life after that with a next generation system that is totally separate and distinct from the old one, and shows whether you can thrive in the new scarce spectrum world as well as you did when you had more spectrum than you knew what to do with.
That's a perfect segue because you talked about the various technologies that can be used in this space and to be able to offer these services. What would you say, and obviously everybody's goal, I would hope, is to make sure that we can get the most innovative products and services available in the hands of consumers as quickly as possible. What would you all say is the biggest stumbling block to that? Would you say that it's the technologies and the pace in which the technologies can keep up and the capacities like we just talked about? Would you say that it is the business strategies and making a sustainable business strategy and shifting with what the consumer wants and not being able to sometimes predict what the consumer wants and how they're going to behave? What are the legal implications, and is that another stumbling block? What are the roadblocks to getting innovation out there in the hands of consumers?
I guess I'll start with sort of an easy stumbling block, and that's something I mentioned already, and that's the programming rights. As the world changes and as the way that consumers watch television and interact with television programming changes, the way that the programming is made available to distributors, it has to change as well. And so, we're in an evolutionary period right here, and it ties, I think, into business model evolution as well. But just extending the programming rights to, viewing on different devices, streamed in the home, for example, and then adding a mobility component to that as well, so making programming available outside the home. And today we have 600 plus channels on the regular linear programming, much smaller subset that's streamable within the home, and then an even smaller subset that's streamable to your mobile device outside of the home. And obviously that's something that we want to continue to work with programmers on, is how we can find win-win solutions to make their programming available on more devices and in more places.
And is that just about money? Or is it more complicated than that?
Obviously, money is a big part of it. Ultimately, it's about money. But I think part of it is just, again, getting back to the changing business models and learning from experience. Does making this available on these other devices outside the home affect content providers' revenue in other ways? And so I think it's growing more comfortable with that. And I don't know if anybody on the panel can talk to it more from a content provider perspective.
I have John jump in, and then Matt.
I mean, there's a lot of reasons. I think it's pretty undeniable that the video industry has changed more slowly than, say, the newspaper industry, the music industry, and it changes more slowly than other just sort of high-tech style industries. And I think the reason is the largest incumbents do pretty well under the system as it is, and they don't really have an incentive to change. The people who really want to change the market tend to be coming in from the outside, and they find it's very difficult. I think when you look at just recent history, where a number of very large, well-funded companies have had trouble really entering the marketplace in a disruptive way. You've had Intel's year-long saga of trying to launch a video service and then basically giving up. You've had rumors of Apple and Amazon both looking to get more aggressively into online video than the services they offer today. And they find that the programming rights are very difficult to get, or even if they can afford to pay them, the structure of the contracts with the current largest distributors make it very difficult for the programmers to sell to them on the terms they want. So I think basically the fact that the incumbents benefit from the system today and they have the means to slow down the pace of change.
Throw in we talked earlier, which we were getting ready, and I'll bring Matt and George in next, about the Dish offering that's forthcoming. You want to talk a little bit about that, maybe how that fits into this conversation?
It's pretty interesting. I mean, I think people know that Dish really does have a history of doing some sort of more interesting offerings, and the fact that they want to offer basically a more full subscription video service online is interesting. I think both the satellite providers need to have some sort of path for the future. DirecTV's plan is apparently to hook up with AT&T, and I think Dish's is to become more of an online style provider. I think it's interesting. I think the very interesting thing for me is the way that they've leveraged what they won in the courtroom with the Hopper case, and then they basically have given up some of the rights that they won under things that they're legally allowed to do under copyright law under that decision. They then negotiated away to some of the large programming companies in exchange for more online rights, and I think that's a very interesting strategy, and it's one that you wouldn't expect anyone besides Dish to do.
George and Matt, you want to come in next?
Well, yeah, I was going to add, I mean, I agree with John and David that securing the programming rights has been difficult for online video startups, but it's equally difficult for established cable operators. And the small cable operators for many years have been complaining about the bundling practices of programming providers. We have a number of large programming conglomerates. There's a very interesting antitrust lawsuit that Cablevision brought against Viacom that's challenging those bundling practices. And seeing how all that plays out is going to have a very big impact on the industry. And there's also some legal impediments. I think what Dish is doing is innovative and interesting, but a lot of cable operators have been impeded not just because programming providers won't agree to unbundle certain packages, allow for slimmer tiers or more a la carte type offerings, but because the law is really anachronistic. There's a to my mind, indefensible legacy of the law that requires cable operators, if they want to sell a service like HBO, to force the consumer to buy the basic tier, including broadcast programming and PEG programming. And in today's marketplace, where you have so much choice, all these devices, all these over-the-top services, and we all enjoy this incredible array of options, to me it's craziness that as a consumer, I'm not allowed to buy HBO unless I take that forced broadcast programming. And nothing against broadcast programming, I enjoy it. I just don't want to be compelled as a legal matter to buy that as a condition of enjoying upper tiers of service. So that's something Congress is looking at, and I think it's a real restraint on innovation, because a lot of the cable operators in the industry, not just through over-the-top offerings, but through traditional cable platforms, want to offer innovative packages, want to offer their younger viewers who don't want the 600-channel environment something leaner and more customized, but it's difficult to do that under today's statute.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to have an area where the cable industry, or much of the cable industry and public knowledge agree, it's certainly there. I don't think that the basic tier buy-through requirements make much sense today, if they ever did. I don't see why someone should be forced to buy programming which they can admittedly get for free over the air with an antenna if they don't want to, unless they find it convenient. And whatever you think about the merits of a la carte, it's always been a controversial topic, particularly in mandating a la carte. However, it certainly doesn't make any sense for there to be laws prohibiting a la carte, which is what we have effectively today, at least for broadcast programming. Again, it's nothing against broadcasters. I don't think any set of programmers should receive those rights.
There you have it. PK and cable agreeing again. Just another another day at the ball yard. George, you want to jump in now? So the question, as Danielle framed it, was about innovation and what the barriers were, and there's a lot of focus on content costs. We'll talk a little bit about the content cost model here in the U.S., and then we'll go to some other barriers from there.
Well, interesting. I mean, all these topics you just brought up, from technology to the laws to the dish product, are all fascinating. But the cost of content keeps going up. Content's key, not the device. What is bothersome is some of the attitudes of younger people that don't feel they have to pay. When I asked our newest employee what she watches, it was YouTube, it was Hulu, Netflix, and freetv.com, which is a pirated service that links you to pirated sites. And she pulled up everything from True Blood to Lost to Anarchy. But that's not healthy for the industry. There's also a trend towards content that's not tentpole, that's created by the common man, and that's low cost, and that's increasingly taking a share of the video time. So for an expensive show that's getting more expensive, because ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, years ago, the shows came to them. And now there's so many outlets out there, they have to spend more through retrans, taking the retrans money to buy more expensive programming, but I think they're going to be competing against inexpensive programming. I don't want to be cavalier about the technology, because you technologists always seem to surprise and to deliver, but coming up with a sustainable business model, I think, is key. And now we're watching trends like binging and more serial, less movie. It's a competitive market out there. I'm glad I don't have to make these calls.
Anybody else want to weigh in on it? Johnny, we'll come back.
One point which I think just sometimes gets overlooked with online content distribution in general is the extent to which new stuff competes with catalog stuff to an extent that you've never seen before, where you can go on to Netflix and you could watch the Rockford Files instead of watching something which is a brand new program. Same with music, same with ebooks, where nothing really has to go out of print and nothing really has to be unavailable. That just adds a competitive dimension and makes it a lot harder. I think in music you find like a lot of new artists complain that, with some of the online streaming services, these older artists are still collecting so much of the revenue that it's actually harder as a new artist, where that's very different than, for example, like the record sales market, which used to you'd always have healthy catalog sales, but at the most part, eventually everyone who wanted the old album would buy it, and then new sales would go to new people. So I think that is something that I'm seeing with a lot of people that I know, that they're watching just tons of older programming and not what's new, because partly also that's just what's available on the online services.
What is PK worried about in terms of innovation, in terms of barriers? We talked about one. Matt raised the problem with the basic tier.
There's two. I mean, there are the legal barriers, and PK's put forward legal proposals for years that we think could get rid of some of those and help the market to evolve. A big concern of ours right now is where you see sometimes a split in the cable industry, where some of the dominant distributors are so large that they are able to use most favored nation contracts to keep programming out of the hands of upstart competitors. And I think that when you have this unbalance of power, where some distributors or some programmers are so large, I think that actually holds back the evolution of the market.
Matt, perhaps you might want to weigh in on that.
I think the market power these days is undeniable in the hands of the large programmers. If you look at the rate of increase of programming costs year over year, significantly ahead of inflation, those economic results can be achieved only when they have more leverage than the distributors. And even the larger distributors are at the mercy of that. I was representing Time Warner Cable when it was in its dispute with CBS, and there's always been theorizing about what happens when marquee content is off the air. But those theories don't mean much when you're in one of those disputes. And what happened was Time Warner Cable lost a lot of subscribers because people don't like being deprived of CBS and Showtime. And that leverage has translated into huge increases in retransmission consent payments and huge increases in cable programming. And when it comes to MFNs, I really don't think it's cable operators insisting on any tie-ups of programming. It's the programming providers choosing the business model, as David referred to earlier. Today we have large programming conglomerates that are earning significant revenue from the existing model, where they distribute via MVPD platforms. They may find in the future that it's more profitable for them to disaggregate and to take some of that content and sell it over the internet. That's a company like HBO that's That's a choice I'm sure they think about every day. They're looking at their revenue opportunities by selling through cable and satellite, and one day they may decide that selling direct to the consumer, as Netflix has done, is a better model. But those choices are made by programmers. They're not made by distributors.
Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Well, I just noticed as you talk about impediments to innovation, and everyone has talked about what some of those are, but one that is not on the list and shouldn't be on the list is the pace of technological development. That seems to outpace all the business agreements. It certainly outpaces the regulatory environment that gives new meaning to glacial in terms of pace. Necessarily, they are thorough. But I think if those business things can be worked out, and if you're in a regulatory environment, if those things can be worked out, technology won't be the problem, and consumers will flock to any technology that can get through the business and the regulatory issues.
So one model that had its time in the headlines is the Aereo business model, and we obviously have had some judicial action on that. Folks' reactions to Aereo, what it means to the video future of the United States. Would you have decided it differently? Were you surprised at all by it? Who wants to jump in on that? I thought, George, I remember reading some of your stuff on this. So,
Second-guessing federal circuit court judges appointed for life is the hardest thing we have to do. And I've never met an entrepreneur since Bill McGowan, like Chet, who manages to get in front of just about every investor that my company deals with. And he made a very good case rebutting public-private. And I said, some judge is going to go up to the 30,000-foot level and look down and say, you're pirating. And so I felt confident the Supreme Court, which I thought was stacked in favor of copyright holders, would rule against Aereo. But I got the head count completely wrong. I had 7-2. Was my bet. It came in 6-3. I lost all 3 Republicans. I had Breyer write the report. I didn't think he would side as he did. And Sotomayor was worried about the cloud. So the one thing I think Wall Street was missing was they thought if Aereo wins, broadcasters just go to the Hill and get a fix. And that wasn't, I thought, going to be the case, because I think cable satellite for 2 years has been pounding Congress to say, don't let that signal go dark. Give us distance signal, force broadcasters into arbitration. So a loss by the broadcasters, I don't think it was going to be fixed by Congress. I thought they probably would have slugged it out on the merits at the court level.
Others on Aereo?
Yeah, I mean, public knowledge, we filed an amicus brief at the Supreme Court and in several of the proceedings below, also in Philmon, the related case. We supported Aereo. We looked at it much more from a copyright lens, though. I mean, PK does a lot of just copyright policy work, yet Aereo, it's one of these things which comes up constantly in these telecommunications and video forums where people don't really want to get into the fine details of how you define the scope of the public performance right and the implications for other technologies. I can't say that I was surprised at the outcome, particularly given how the oral argument went. I was surprised by the reasoning, because the reasoning essentially just said, forget about the details of what the text of the statute is or the implications. This looks like cable, so therefore we're going to treat it like cable for this purpose. But, well, what about for other purposes? What about under the Communications Act? What about for the purpose of the compulsory license? Total silence on that. It also doesn't answer the question. It's like, okay, so do we now have a new copyright principle where a thing that looks like a thing is always treated like that thing? Or is it limited just to cable? It's one of these decisions which really created more questions than it answered. It answered a big question for Aereo, the company, but I think it just continued to raise so many questions and a lot of issues about the future of things that want to be considered like cable or an MVPD, yet operate online are really still unanswered by that case.
Let me do one quick follow-up. So why does it matter to consumers, if at all? And then to tie it back to what the commission may or may not be reported to be doing in terms of OBDs and MVPD structure and in terms of the soon-to-be circulated, reported to soon-to-be circulated item.
Yeah, I mean, from the consumer perspective, I think it matters. It's just yet another choice for consumers for access to particular programming in a more convenient way. I think there's a lot of demand for that. I think it's undeniable that people crave more online video, and I think that is partly the cause of the illegal services that were mentioned before. Basically, when there's consumer demand, people find a way to respond to it in ways legal and not. Just to put on my lawyer hat, the definition of MVPD is really technology neutral, and I've never, public knowledge has long argued that MVPD should apply to anyone who offers a service that is basically linear streaming video, whether they own facilities or not. So if the FCC recognizes that the law, as passed by Congress, which was, when I'm looking at statutes, it's hard to imagine a statute which is written to be more technology neutral than the definition of multi-channel video programming distributor, where Congress really went out of its way to insulate itself against future technology change. And yet there's been some in the FCC who have argued that, no, we want to limit it to facilities-based. I think if the FCC does away with that misguided policy, I think it'll be good. I couldn't predict what'll happen by creating an entire new business model. It really depends, but just as a legal matter, I think it's common sense.
So maybe two reactions, Aereo and MVPD. On the Aereo side, I agree with a lot of what John said. I expected the outcome, but you always worry about a holding that's grounded in the if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck theory, it must be a duck, because we do worry about the implications of the reading of the transmit clause in the Copyright Act. I think the majority was quite worried about that itself. Sotomayor was worried about the cloud, so was Justice Breyer, and I think they really did try to reach out and say, we're not banning cloud-based technologies, we're not banning the cloud DVR. There's only so far they can go with that. The Supreme Court doesn't issue advisory opinions, but I think the concern about trampling on existing technology models was evident, and hopefully that concern will find its way into future decisions by the courts. On the MVPD issue, I don't agree with John that it's technology neutral in the sense that it applies equally to over-the-top and facilities-based providers. What the FCC's Media Bureau said in the one decision that's out there, I think is correct as a legal matter, which is that the statute contemplates providing multiple channels of video programming in terms of physical channels of electromagnetic spectrum. I think what the statute contemplated was that someone's providing that infrastructure, whether it's a cable infrastructure or a satellite infrastructure, is in MVPD. It's not channels in the colloquial sense of Channel 4 and Channel 7. We'll see if the FCC wants to reverse course, and those of us who watch the FCC closely understand the Media Bureau didn't make that prior decision in a vacuum. It was done with the support of then Chairman Janikowski. It represented, I think, the view of the agency. So the agency is free to change its mind, and it's relatively easy to do so in this context where there wasn't a commission-level decision. And the implications, I think, are going to be interesting, because Section 628 of the Act, which governs program access, has very broad language about unfair acts, and if you apply that into the online environment, it's a potentially sweeping source of authority for the FCC to start regulating internet-delivered video.
A big issue that we've been hearing a lot about, and it's turned to video, is the open internet proceeding. It used to be about a lot of other issues, reasonable network management, what have you. I mean, the times have changed, and now it's becoming much more about video stream, because that's what's going to be implicated mostly by these rules, it seems like, or that seems to be most of the controversy now. So I wanted to tee that up and see what folks have to say about both the consumer implications and whether or not it's going to affect what consumers receive and the cost that they receive it for and the manner in which they receive it, but then also from the investment side, because we're the manufacturers of the products and services who build these networks. So what we always think about is the certainty in this environment and making sure that we continue to investment is very important to our members. So I'll just open it up and maybe start with the consumer question to John. You want to go ahead and start that off for us, please?
Oh yeah, we love net neutrality, and we think that the best way to promote investment and more consumer choice is for strong net neutrality rules, Title II, all of it. I think it's pretty clear that, when you look at how the debate has been playing out in net neutrality, it's true. I mean, net neutrality is not just about online video, but the fact that you do tend to have the major providers of online video on one side of the issue and everyone else on the other side is sort of some evidence that net neutrality rules would tend to favor, the creation and distribution of more online video choices.
Yeah, so, Verizon is in a sort of unique position here in that we're kind of on both sides of the equation. We are, of course, broadband broadband provider, and we have customers who expect open internet connections. And nobody can deny the success of online video, over-the-top video in the broadband marketplace today. We've already talked about the tremendous growth that's occurred there. But Verizon is also in the over-the-top video business today with our partnership with Redbox, and it's no secret that we're looking at other opportunities as well. And so we in turn depend on open internet connections provided by other broadband providers as well in order to reach potential customers with that content. So preserving that open internet is obviously very important to us, but equally important, and we talked about this before too, as online video grows, the investment in networks is going to need to continue significantly. And so in order to accommodate that growth, significant new investment in both fixed and mobile networks is going to be required. And that's why we think it's really important for the FCC to strike the right balance in whatever rules that it adopts to preserve the investment-friendly regulatory framework that we've had in place for the last 20 years with respect to broadband internet access. But at the same time provide the assurances for preserving openness.
So John, as I understand your position, Title II, you're a fan. David, you're not a fan. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think that Title II is not necessary for the FCC to adopt meaningful rules and would have significant negative consequences, one of the most significant being on investment in infrastructure.
George or Matt, you want to come in next?
From a capital market point of view, Title II would probably be a disaster. Regulating an internet provider like a gas, water, electric utility, the immediate effect is the stocks would drop. And that means the cost of capital goes up. And if the cost of capital goes up, then you're going to have less investment, not to mention the uncertainty associated with heavy-handed regulation. You also bring in the states. The idea of forbearing seems to be naive. And you're going to get 60% of broadband suppliers coming underneath network neutrality conditions as a result of the AT&T and the Comcast deal. So we're hoping that the rules are relatively benign.
So, we can just talk about this stuff all day, as the telecommunications bar has been doing for the past several years, but I will just say Title II is not utility regulation and common carriage is not utility regulation, as we spelled extensively in our comments. It's just ahistorical and false to equate the two. Second, to say that Title II is somehow a disaster for investment, I would wonder what the wireless industry has to say about that, since even today, every single cell phone in everyone's pocket in this room has a Title II service of wireless voice, and that did not seem to impede the investment in the development of mobile, and I don't think it would have a damping effect on wired broadband either.
Matt?
Well, yes, there is so much to debate. On the wireless side, I mean, we all draw the opposite conclusions from the same historical evidence. In my experience, working at the FCC and in private practice, the lesson I draw from the wireless industry was only when Congress preempted state regulation and fenced off most of Title II from wireless services that those services took off and became probably the most vibrant sector of the communications industry. And by contrast, the services that have been most heavily subject to the full panoply of Title II and traditional plain old telephone services are hardly a model of vibrancy that we want to emulate. I mean, my clients in the cable arena certainly agree with what David has said on behalf of Verizon and George's observations about how capital markets will react is the reason. And I think what we shouldn't lose sight of through all the heat and light in the net neutrality debate is remarkably how much consensus there is today compared to the early years of this debate. When I was at the FCC and Brian was in the early 2000s and the first seeds of the net neutrality debate were emerging, there's really widespread disagreement between ISPs and edge providers and others as to whether any regulation was appropriate at all. Today we have a very different record. All of the ISPs are saying we embrace the concept of regulation. We support transparency. We can either live with or, for some providers, actively support a prohibition against blocking. And everybody is saying anti-competitive discrimination, other unreasonable arrangements between broadband providers and edge providers, harmful paid prioritization arrangements ought to be prohibited in some manner. So there's a remarkable degree of consensus around that substance. We're just having a big debate about legal authority. And where I come out, where my clients come out, as David said, is we don't need to pretend broadband is something other than what the Commission has said 4 times over the years, what the Supreme Court endorsed to achieve a policy result that the DC Circuit said in the Verizon case can be achieved under Section 706. So many providers for years have had an agenda to impose common carrier regulation. I happen to think that's the wrong prescription, but I also happen to think it's totally unnecessary to achieve open internet protections.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for coming, having this discussion with us today. It doesn't just affect our daily lives, but it's become a very important topic in and around DC, and also people who came in from out of town. We do have a lot of people from the fields who, you're actually having an audience who takes this back home with them to their businesses and applies it to where they're going with their businesses. Thanks to Rosemary so much for helping, and Brian, my partner in crime, for co-moderating, and thank you so much for coming. Our membership really appreciates it. Thank you.